Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
In an age where juego de posición dominates the footballing zeitgeist, and every new manager seems to have a factory-made philosophy, there is something beautiful about seeing an old-school manager standing atop the mountain. One who is not concerned about having a set style of play, so that the public can dub it Ancelotti ball and give him a sense of pride. Ancelotti believes in being a player-first manager, assessing what he has available to him and then creating a style to suit them, rather than shoehorning them into a dogmatic ideology. And yet it is this freedom that makes him a sly tactical manager, one who has the ability to leave the most heralded tactical managers spinning in circles whilst his heart rate barely changes. And the beauty of his philosophy, and yes, he does have one, has been best exemplified during his Real Madrid reigns. His first tenure oversaw Ronaldo in his prime, and his tactics were attuned to getting the best out of the Portuguese. With Ronaldo nominally off the left-hand side when Real Madrid were in possession, he was allowed to drift wherever he pleased. Carlo Ancelotti realized that he had a once-in-a-lifetime player at his disposal, so his sole goal was to get the ball to him at every opportunity, as he said himself. The midfield became a creative hub, with the ability to find CR7 at will. This involved moving Angel Di Maria from right wing to central midfield to accommodate him and Bale, and the Argentine, paired with Modric or Alonso or Isco, would then look to find Ronaldo as often as possible. And the goal of having a highly creative midfield, in large parts to help Ronaldo, continued the next season, with Toni Kroos and James Rodriguez rising to prominence. Testament to Ancelotti, he had the team playing for each other, having Benzema sacrifice himself for the side, moving centrally and wide at Ronaldo's whim, so much so that for a while, Benzema was just viewed as the finest of the workhorse strikers. The fluidity of Ronaldo was helped as Marcelo, another all-time great, dominated the flank, and would provide width aplenty. There was a second layer to this facilitation of excellence. Ancelotti knew that trying to turn Ronaldo into a defensively disciplined powerhouse was A, unlikely to happen, and B, even if it did happen, it would be a complete waste of resources, as a slight increase in his defense was not worth a decrease in his goals. So Ancelotti never asked Ronaldo to track back. In defense, he shifted to a 4-4-2 to give Ronaldo less room to defend, which was aided by Benzema further sacrificing himself. The results speak for themselves. Ancelotti was the man to finally break the curse and win Real Madrid La Decima. Not only that, Ronaldo had easily his most prolific return on a goal and assist to game ratio under Ancelotti. That's if we ignore his goal every 68 ratio under the GOAT, Michael Carrick. If his early tenure was about seeing a team at the peak of its power finally achieve its potential, his second tenure was about overseeing a transition to a new era. Casemiro, Modric and Kroos were all aging. The likes of Marcelo and Gareth Bale were mere shadows of the phenoms Ancelotti used to know. There was no Ramos, and there was no more Ronaldo. And yet Carlo was unperturbed, and in the seasons since his return we have seen him adapt consistently. When comparing the quality of his midfielders in possession, there was one clear weak link. So Ancelotti persisted with pushing Casemiro into a more attacking zone during the deep build-up to get his two world-class midfielders on the ball, which also had the side effect of seeing Casemiro occasionally pop up in goal-scoring positions. What was fascinating is that when teams tried to compact the center to prevent the ball into the pivots, Ancelotti's Madrid had clear patterns of play to disrupt the shape. Toni Kroos would drop into the left channel, a trademark of his game, but teams were wise to this fact. So Modric began to mirror this down the right-hand side simultaneously, effectively splitting the pitch in half and dividing the opposition's defensive numbers. Of course, there were potential risks with this, leaving a chasm in the center of midfield. But when this worked, it was outstanding. Where many teams often get caught up in the dreaded U, passing endlessly between the fullbacks and the centre-backs, having two elite progressors in the fullback regions meant that they could always break this pattern. It dragged the opposition shape around the pitch and could still open up room in the middle for Benzema to drop in when needed, or whoever was the right winger to do the same thing down their flank. But the major ploy was indeed to create overloads down the flanks, be it down the right hand side to force the opposition to overcommit one way and then open up the switch to Vinicius, where Ancelotti wanted the Brazilian to have the space to use his unbelievable trickery. But Madrid preferred to begin play down the left hand side. Benzema was now the star of the team and trusted with high attacking responsibility. Ancelotti. He would drift left, and he and Vinicius had a telepathic relationship. At times when Benzema dropped, he drew a centre-back, which was the signal for the run in behind. But they could also both hang on the left-hand side, executing 1-2s to try and get Vinicius in behind while opening up room for the late run from the likes of Benzema. It was under Ancelotti that Benzema would win his first and only Ballon d'Or. But Ancelotti still had a lot of change to deal with. Casemiro left, Toni Kroos and Modric were just another year older. They still got a lot of minutes, but Ancelotti was beginning to devise a succession plan and ways to ease the strain on their legs. As he said, Tchouaméni joined the club, like fellow French midfielder Camavinga had done the season before. And despite Ancelotti not being a disciple of juego de posición, a combination of the makeup of his players and the strategy that he suggested had led to overloads and isolations still being a big part of their gameplay. Tchouaméni slotted in at defensive midfield, but unlike Casemiro before him, Ancelotti had the Frenchman maintain his place at the base of the midfield, but still playing relatively simple to entrust Kroos and Modric with more of the ball. This not only meant less ground for the two to cover with the ball, but more importantly less running without it, as they had a younger, more mobile defensive midfielder beginning deep to help them out. Federico Valverde started a lot of matches on the right wing rather than in his preferred central midfield role. But of course this would be temporary, and the marauding Carvajal would make the move from deep, letting Valverde move central. They morphed into a diamond, not because of some rigid ideology, but because it was the most effective solution for the problem. They now had more legs around this aging duo in case the play broke down, and it also meant they could still overload the midfield. If the opposition were too tight on Kroos and Modric, they were more than good enough to still find the midfielders higher up, even under pressure. But if they tried to cut out the passing options instead, Kroos and Modric could then switch into the men providing the width, or Modric in particular could carry the ball upfield. This optionality in midfield, both to protect and accentuate these two, was also allowed as Ancelotti in this season started Camavinga at left back. Camavinga would then invert into the midfield to be an extra passing option, but also an extra layer of protection if the game broke down in the midfield. And still, the overload around the ball either directly opened up the flank, or if Real concentrated their play down the right hand side, made room for Vinicius to receive a switch and use his 1 versus 1 ability against the fullback. And like the season prior, Madrid were happy for Benzema and Vinicius to overload the left hand side as well. The year is 2024. Ancelotti is at retirement age, but his tactical flexibility means he is still one of the very best around. He's lost a Ballon d'Or winner, and another was beginning to age out and saw fewer minutes than ever. But Ancelotti won the Champions League, the League, and produced 2 more players capable of challenging for the Golden Ball. With no recognized centre forward, and only Joselu as replacement, many questioned how Real Madrid would cope without Benzema. But that temporary opportunistic diamond of the prior season became a permanent fixture. Valverde finally got consistent starts in his midfield role, with Jude Bellingham coming in at the tip of the diamond. And it was the season that Ancelotti could no longer use the legs of both Kroos and Modric at the same time, and Modric was the man who was most often sacrificed. In the season before, when they used a midfield diamond or a midfield 5, it was still just Benzema up top. But now, Vinicius and Rodrigo were a dynamic duo. With such a small front line, you would think the goal would be to play short, to either draw the opposition into a press and then release them over the top, or simply work the ball into the feet of the number 9s. And yes, there was a lot of that. But if the situation demanded it, Ancelotti was more than happy to go long into these 2 men, who did a surprisingly good job of aerially disrupting headers. This was made even more effective when it was Bellingham who was the target of these longer balls, as he could win the long ball and had 2 men waiting to win the second ball. And when they built, fluidity and adaptability were still key. Kroos still loved to drop in, but instead of leaving 2 isolated midfielders, Bellingham can drop into the midfield. But higher up is where things get interesting, as Jude Bellingham can fluctuate between being an attacking midfielder drifting around the pitch to help create overloads and being more of a forward. When he is a forward, one or both of the wingers can move away to get space away from the crowded centre to try and receive in 1 versus 1 positions. And even the role of the fullbacks varies, tending to be slightly more asymmetric, as if Rodrigo is wide, Carvajal moves in field, but more likely he prefers to provide width to give Rodrigo the freedom to drift around the pitch. Mendy on the other side can advance, but he bides his time more, as both Vinicius and Kroos are on his side of the pitch, so he needs to be ready to cover for them defensively. And again, with the freedom, Vinicius and Rodrigo can be central, but we often see both men moving left to terrorize the right back, drawing them in to allow the other to run behind. behind, or creating space to cut infield. And now by having 3 attacking players, when the ball does go wide, they have many targets to aim for and can whip in crosses, with the late arriving Bellingham often being the target. It is not the rigid structures and predictable patterns that we associate with elite tactical managers, but Ancelotti's adaptability means he is still top of the pile. But why is the more Pep Guardiola approach praised more in this day and age? This video on screen now will explain everything.